Hi everyone. Normally when we talk about these types of videos, I'd start with an introduction saying something along the lines of, imagine a world where a virus has taken over and people have made to question what makes society the way that it is. Of course, being in Melbourne in the year 2020 at the moment while I'm filming this video, that's not that far away from a reality, but it's really important that we are able to take away what's happening in the world with COVID and be able to separate it from what's happening here in St John Mandel's Station 11. And that we don't get too caught up in thinking about the ifs, buts and the whats and the similarities, but rather really make sure that we focus on exactly what Mandel is saying to us through her text. And so in today's video, I'm going to give you a range of ideas that I think will really help you understand this text in a deeper way. I'm going to discuss it in a way in which I'm going to be talking not just about what I think Mandel is saying through this text and the real deeper meanings that can exist here, but also how she's got this across, so that way you can take some notes, you can rewind the video as many times as you want and jump to certain parts and walk away with a really deep understanding of a really great interpretation, but also with a whole bunch of evidence that you can use in your essays to be able to show how well you understand the text and what Mandel is saying. And so the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is this idea of a society. And obviously we can't just stand there and say Mandel makes comments about society. Well, what comments does she make? And so the first few things I'm going to talk to you about revolve around how this society has come to organise itself. And obviously through this novel, Mandel has used the Georgia flu as this way of asking questions about how we live our lives in a modern context. Because if we can take away technology, if we can take away law and order and all these social conventions that exist, what's left? And so this is obviously a really great way for Mandel to be able to explore the way in which we currently live our lives by putting forward a fictional tale of a world in which so much of what we take for granted is gone. And so one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea that people get a lot of value out of what they contribute to a society. The first time we see this is in the very early pages when we have Walter Jacoby, I'm a cardiologist. This makes sense for him to say this to Jeevan, of course, because they think that Arthur is having a heart attack, of course, and they're looking to engage in CPR and whatnot. But it is still telling that he introduces himself with not just his name, but also what he does. And so this idea comes back many times throughout the novel, and I'm sure you can think of other examples about it, where who we are and what we do is a huge part of how we see ourselves and the worth that we get to ourselves as people within a society. Of course, Jeevan himself actually is one of the few people that in the post-pandemic world seems to have this sense of contentment about how he lives his life, that he is someone who can heal others, and that when it's questioned about whether he's a doctor or not, he's quite happy to snap back and ask a person if he'd like to go to somebody else, and that he feels like he's found the thing that makes him who he wants to be and found who he wants to be, because before that, obviously, he wasn't quite there. This also comes through in the airport scene where there are people who start to do push-ups by gate B20 and the kids who start doing cartwheels somewhere. And then we have those group of people that start shoveling snow off the runways, and the quote where they say that they felt like they had to do something. And that's really telling for me in this idea that people feel that they must do something, that their lives, the purpose of their lives has to come down to what they can contribute and what they can do, as opposed to what they can feel and who they are. And so there's lots of ways that we can look at that and think about what Mandel might be saying about how a society has rendered us to think about ourselves and to find our worth through what we can contribute and what we can do for other people. What's really curly about this one, though, is that in the post-pandemic world, all the members of the Travelling Symphony are known by what they do, the third guitar, the cello, the whoever it might be. And that while we do know the names of some of them, quite often the way that Kirsten talks about them and the way that the narrator talks about them as well is through what they do. And so we need to think about this in terms of what this is saying about society and the way that it's organised in a contemporary context. What does it suggest about human beings that we are looking at what we do for each other as a way to find value in ourselves and a way to find a sense of worth within this society? And so while we're thinking about this idea of this greater society that is sort of holding all of us in and having this effect on us, we can start to think about the manner in which we have these unwritten rules and these restrictions or these conventions that lead us to behave in certain ways. And of course, the Georgia flu takes so many of them away. And the way in which that happens is really a fantastic way for you to start to think about some of the messages that Mandel might be getting across. A really great example, I think, of this is the manner in which, after a few days at the airport, the people will refuse to actually steal the food from I think it's a Mexican restaurant that exists there at Severn City Airport, and that they have this unease about taking something that is not theirs. And when we look at that and we view it from our point of view as readers, we're looking at it thinking the world's ending, take all the food you can while it's still there. But they still are held by these ideas. They're still held by these social conventions. It's wrong to steal. That is not mine. I can't take that. And then when we start to think about how these laws exist, obviously we start to look at it at the point where we see that these laws are a construction, that they are something that we have learned to live by and something that we have learned to be restrained by. We have Clark as well in that really telling scene where he walks back and forth through the security gates. And the idea that it seems so foreign to him that these security gates that really are just physical things that exist in this world now, because we have no need for security gates because there's no planes flying anywhere, still have this impact on him where he feels like he's doing something differently by walking through them because it's not something that he should do. What's really telling about that, though, is that he doesn't feel liberation and freedom. Rather, it mentions that he actually feels fear. And that's a really telling sign, because for all these things we might want to say about the constrictions that society place on us, it's also this security blanket that exists around us, and that society exists in this way where people buy into it and what they're going to do, and it gives them that sense of security about their lives and how they are living their lives. One of the telling things about the Mexican food restaurant that I talked about before was the idea that there is the businessman who puts his Amex down next to the till, next to the register, and that allows these people to feel like, okay, now it's the right thing to do. Of course, again, as we look at it, we're thinking that we're in this world now where technology and money are absolutely meaningless. And of course, that Amex card is referred to later on, and it actually becomes a part of the Museum of Civilization. So have a think about why Mandel would have included that, in that it was this symbol of something that allowed people to think, no, if this is going to be paid for, then I'm okay with taking the food. But then it just sat there for days and months, because of course the idea of money and a transaction from an Amex card and a credit card and a vendor and all of these things became completely irrelevant. And so it took time, though, for those constraints of the society, or for that understanding of how these things exist within society, to fall away. And so that's a really great way for you to see it, that how long does it take until these unwritten rules that we live by slowly fade away. Of course, we don't just want to take a really blunt understanding of looking at it and saying, oh, society puts all these restrictions upon us. As I mentioned before, Clark feels that sense of fear when he realizes that he can just walk between the security gates. We also have the young girl who's looking for Effexor, the antidepressant medication, and we see what the impact that has there. And so Mandel's message is not necessarily that we need to get rid of all of these things that restrict us, but also thinking about the way in which we've come to rely on a society that's so much bigger than us. Of course, we also have the girl at the cashier who talks to Jeevan and says, oh, I've heard about it. It'll be just like SARS. There's this way in which people are thinking about this disease and saying that someone else will take care of it. It'll be all right. It will blow over. It'll be just like SARS, in that people feel this sense of safety within the society that they live in. And of course, the question that comes about throughout this novel of, well, what if that safety is taken away from us? If you take a look at the context of how this novel came about and what inspired Mandel to write it, you'll see that a lot of it came from Hurricane Katrina, and that there is the story of the people who sought refuge in the football stadium in New Orleans. And there are people quoted as saying, you know, the government will come for us soon, the National Guard will come for us soon. And of course, one of the big criticisms of the Americans' handling of that situation was that nobody came to help these people. And of course, that's one of the founding questions that Mandel has used to inspire her novel, this idea of what if these things that we felt would always be there to help us weren't? And so we can start to think about what we can really tease out of it when we think about it in this way. So, away from the doom and gloom, what can we find in this novel that's not just talking about the destruction of a society? I want you to think about some of the more life-affirming messages that Mandel includes, and these come down to this idea of what makes a life, and what makes it a purposeful life, and where we can find true meaning. And of course, we have the most probably quoted quote when it comes to this text, in that survival is insufficient, in that it's not just enough to live a life, that we need to find enjoyment and beauty and art. And of course, the Travelling Symphony are a fantastic vehicle through which Mandel explores this idea. But I also want you to be really keen on looking out for little things that she mentions. Quite often Mandel will deal in the minutiae of life. She'll deal with things such as, doing a crossword in bed, or having breakfast, or the glint on the desk in a lobby. These tiny little things, the sound that's made as a knife hits a tree in the woods, and these little tiny moments of life and this beauty that can be found within them. And so we can start to think about what her message might be there then, in terms of what people can find in a life and what it can still exist within humanity when we take away all of these things that we've become so reliant upon. And rather than looking that always in a negative way, we can start to think about it in a affirming way, in terms of, if we strip away all of the things that human beings have become to be reliant upon, what still exists that gives us hope, that gives us freedom, that gives us a sense of joy, and gives us a sense of beauty as well. This leads us to think about what Mandel might be saying about beauty and these moments in life, and the idea of love and connection to others, and how, from my perspective, one of the messages that I really took from this novel was that was what she was saying is the real, genuine sense of what makes a life worth living. And tragically, this comes about when we have Clark talking about, in his final days, the memories that he has of baking with his mother, of his parents coming to watch him in a show as a young child. We have these memories in the way that he saw that that's what life was about, this real, genuine memory, this genuine sense of connection to someone else. And of course, he cringes at the fact that he used to use such language like, we'll circle back to that, and I'll shoot you an email, and all these types of things, where he looks through these reports and realizes that so much of his life in the corporate world was spent in dealing with what turned out to be inauthentic rubbish, really. And so this idea of claiming a part of ourselves and what we see in love and connection, and being able to find a purpose in our lives based on what's real about it, and the memories of all of those things that make life what it needs to be for us. And beauty plays a major part in that. And so I've got through to this point of the video, and I haven't even talked about Arthur or Miranda yet. And so I'm going to do that now, because I feel like whilst there are so many ideas that come through with both of these characters, the best one that I want to talk to you about from my perspective is this idea of how they construct a reality. So Arthur is this character that, when we're talking about the idea of real and genuine and so on, he clearly is on this journey where he begins to discover that so much of what he thought was valuable about his life really wasn't. Of course, this is tragically made clear to him too late in his life. But what also exists when we look at Arthur and the way in which we begin to see him for who he really is that a lot of what he creates about his life is inauthentic. It's not the true idea. It's not a true sense of love and the way in which he treats other people. The manner in which they talk about the track lighting that exists in the restaurant when he's speaking to Clark after such a long time shows that so much of what he does in his life is this act for other people, that he feels like he's always on stage. And so he constructs this reality around him about what he wants his life to be in this search for meaning. Of course, Miranda is also a person who does this as well. And when we look at the Dr. 11 comics, we see this idea that she is unhappy with her life, particularly with her first boyfriend of the novel, Pablo, and the manner in which she includes that real part of her life, but then includes him in this fictional way where he was unlike him in any other regard. And so she's taken something that exists from her real life and put it in this new reality that she has constructed in a way where she can create her own reality and make it what she wants it to be. And so if you start to go down the rabbit hole with that idea, I'm sure you can think of other characters where they are constructing a reality that isn't actually real, and that they construct this world around themselves as a way of coping with the reality of their lives and being not what they want it to be. And so finally, after all those ideas that we've brought up and the ways that they have come about, the last thing I want you to really think about is this idea of the pre and the post, the pre-Georgia flu and the post-pandemic world, and what survives and what doesn't, and being able to use that as a way to think about some of the ideas and what Mandel might be getting at, because I want you to be able to be thinking of a lot of your own interpretations and how you can see this text. And so when we look at things like religion, perhaps, of course, Tyler and Elizabeth are a fantastic example of this. And then we see that even in this post-pandemic world, that this sense of religion in this, I guess you could call it a new religion, these people who follow Tyler and so on, comes about. And that when everything else was stripped away, there was still this need for people to follow this higher power. There was still this need for people to fall in behind some kind of Messiah, as Tyler represents himself as. And so I want you to think about what Mandel might be saying through that, and the ability for people to look at others and to be able to see themselves as leaders among them, but also the ability for people to want to follow someone such as Tyler and why they would do such things in the post-pandemic world. Of course, we've already talked about order and law and order and how that exists. And I need you to see there that, of course, we have these examples where people still operate by old societal functions, but then the idea that in the early days of the pandemic, things were, for lack of a better term, pretty grim in the way in which so much of it isn't remembered by Kirsten. And that Jeevan talks about the awful things that had to do as he was walking, but that slowly things get better. And so we have this idea of there being this time of great panic, but slowly people started to organise themselves. And so what do you think that Mandel is saying through that, in the manner in which we had order that was completely stripped from us as a society, and then things were taken and lives were lost and people were acting in these extreme ways, but slowly there was improvement? And what do you think that might mean? And finally, of course, as well, there's beauty in the pre and the post pandemic world, and thinking about how that's a tie that exists between. And so things like the paperweight and other symbols that exist in both worlds that show us what life can really be about and what we can find and we can appreciate about life. If you start to think of it, that it exists in both worlds, and that idea that they play versions of pop songs, for example, as well as Shakespeare, what does that say about what people can get from a life, and what Mandel might be saying about the function of art and music and beauty and all those things in our lives? And so I hope you've got a lot out of today's video. We'd appreciate if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've got something out of it. Take a look around the channel to see if we've covered your comparative text. I bet that we have, and that you can also get some advice with argument analysis and other things. So please feel free to have a hunt around there. We love to answer your questions down there in the comments, so please put them there. I'd love to hear what you thought about the video, or any interpretations or questions that you might want to put forward. But until we see you next time, all the best with your studies and good luck.